Ena mana, ena reo, ena waikato, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ni hao ma. And of course, I need to welcome you in many, many different languages because, of course, one of the key issues of the 21st century for New Zealand is that we are a super diverse country. Not just diverse, but super diverse. And it's an issue that I want to return to after thanking Bill for the introduction and thanking you for inviting me here. The reason is because I want to start my presentation today with a proposition, and the proposition is this. Librarians and information managers have the most important job in the 21st century. I just want to repeat that. Librarians and information managers have the most important job in the 21st century. And certainly that is the way that I view it at Chen Palmer. Our firm turns 20 next month. Yeah, it's been 20 years. I never thought I'd still be here, but here I am. And I can remember when we first started, we didn't hire another lawyer, we hired a librarian. And the reason is because I can do almost anything, but I need to be able to find the information. And that has become all the more important. I never understood, and I still do not understand, why it is that in law firms they put the librarians and information managers to one side and they put the lawyers to another side. Actually, the librarians are the more important people. I can do without the lawyers. I just can't do without the librarians and the information people. And so I always made sure that they were in the team meetings. I always made sure that my librarians and my information managers were there when we were briefing about what it was we were looking for. Why would you put them in a back room so that some lawyer does Chinese whispers with them? I never did understand why it was Chinese whispers, but never mind. You know, librarians would come back to you and they're well experienced, and they'd come back to you and they'd say, look, I found this case, but I'm sure that's not what you were looking for. And I said, nope, never asked for this. And they said, well, you obviously told a lawyer who thought you were asking for this. And I said, I never asked for that. So I always found that it was far better to have the librarians at the front end, at the table, sitting with me. Because what I found was that their ability to access information, their knowledge of the information meant that they were incredibly able partners. This is Bonnie and Clyde. This is the Lone Ranger and Tonto. You needed to have your sidekick right there. And what the value they added was enormous. And the value is this, that I am but a lawyer. And actually these days the whole definition of a professional and of an expert has changed. When I say to my son, blah, 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 he says, well, Mum, why would you know that anyway? Just Google it. And he's 11. So I say to myself, these days is so different from when I was growing up, and it's so different actually from the culture in Taiwan that I grew up with. I was born in Taiwan, and in many of those countries, it is still very much based on what you can memorize in your mind. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't great benefit in memorizing and knowing a lot of things. Many people have said, I think in a misguided fashion to me, oh, what a pity that you started your career as an academic. You could have gone straight into private practice, you'd have been far further ahead. They're wrong. What I do every day as a lawyer is teach. And the fact that I had to teach the entire field of public law was of great benefit to me, because the trouble with private practice is you only get to learn what it is people instruct you to help them with. So if they don't instruct you to help them with inquiries, you never know anything about inquiries. Or if they only instruct you to help them with a statutory inquiry, like the one that's currently happening with respect to electricity, then you never know royal commissions or commissions of inquiry. The great thing about teaching is that I learned the entire field, and that I have continued to try and write in the area and teach in the area to push myself on. But what I'm trying to say to you is that the only course that I derived benefit from in law school many years ago was jurisprudence. And the one thing I remember from jurisprudence is this. Karl Popper said that what is important is not what is in the bucket, it is what the bucket looks like. The professional of the 21st century, the expert, is different. I don't really need my solicitors to remember the detail of every case, although, and sometimes it helps. But what I do expect them to know is what a bucket looks like. Because you can find out what's in it. But actually, the only way to find out what is in those buckets now is through people like you. Now, let me tell you about your challenge. And it's a description only, because, of course, it's a challenge you face every day. What is in the bucket now has vastly increased. A person in 1000 AD only had as much knowledge as an average newspaper today. So the whole game has changed. It's about the quality of the information. There's so much of it, but what's right and what's wrong? What's high quality, what's low quality? What are lies? What's dirty politics? What is actually true? And even in Dirty Politics and Hagar's book, 50% of that stuff's real, 50% of it's not. What's the 50% that's true? What's the 50% that's not? How do you tell the difference? It's about organising the information. So when you get a junior and you say, I need X, or you get an information manager and you say, I need Y, what you don't want them to do is tip 10 buckets of information in your office and say, suck on that. What you want them to do is to say, I've been through the whole lot, I think this is the most important, but there's a whole bunch of stuff here that could be tangentially relevant and you need to look through it. You need people with good instincts who can sift. It's a different sort of skill. And so just as we say in New Zealand that we don't want just to export logs to Asia, we want to add value. The added value from the librarian and information management sector is huge, huge. The amount of value you can add in terms of getting me information that is quality information, in terms of organising the information so it is accessible. Yes, I know there's a stack of information out there. That I do know. What I don't know is what is the most useful information. I am overwhelmed by the amount of information that there is out there. And I have just finished the second edition of Public Law Toolbox. I got my last 3 chapters out on Friday. Huge cause of celebration for me. And I just am overwhelmed by the amount of information. We just have to publish that damn thing before anything else happens in the public law space. Because it happens daily and the weekend papers are full of it. It's the speed and the pace. It isn't just newspapers. What are those? Blogs, tweets, internet, Facebook. There are now so many different sources and they are global. They're not just in New Zealand. And they are not just Pākehā, Māori, Pacifica, Asian. There's now a whole range of sources and they're not even in English, but they are necessary for my understanding. The Chinese Herald, Weibo, Sky Kiwi. These are places of information exchange, connection that happen in this country. And that is becoming incredibly important as I started a new organisation called New Zealand Asian Leaders, trying to bring the Asian community together to do good things for New Zealand Inc. Why? Well, because it matters. There's a whole lot of us. And yes, we tend to keep our heads down because we've been discriminated against, but we are no longer a minority. In Auckland, if you put together the Pacifica, the Māori and the Asians, you are at 50%. And so that is relevant to me as a public and constitutional lawyer because democracy is about numbers. And demography has democratic implications because I've just finished writing my constitutional reform chapter and the one major outcome from the constitutional review undertaken as a consequence of the Māori Party's confidence and supply agreement with National was that people want information. They want to understand what is a constitutional change, what is not, and they want to understand what it means for them. And most importantly, they want to have a say. So I think this trend towards citizens-initiated referenda is going to have a substantial impact on the importance of your profession. That is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to point you to the fact that the future is coming to meet your profession. Some silly person said to me, "Why would you want to speak at the LIANZA conference?" And I said, because it's simply the most hot, cool, sexy place to be. The future is coming to meet you. And if there was one thing that I found of greatest importance when I wrote the second edition of Public Law Toolbox, it was you, it was your profession, it is everything in your area. But before I get to that, can I just quote to you from something that Derek Handley, who's a very young, bright Asian New Zealander entrepreneur, spends half his life here, spends half his life in New York and Silicon Valley, said, sold his first company, Hyper Factory, by the time he was in his 30s, early 30s. He's only early 30s now. And he said this: all life cycles have shortened in this new connected world, and it will continue to compress. You need to think about that. All life cycles have shortened in this new connected world, and it will continue to compress. Now that is a truth, and I am experiencing that on a daily basis. Let me explain why I am experiencing it. I never expected to be writing the second edition of my book now. I thought, after the first edition had just about killed me, that was it. And I promised my son, actually, that after the deprivations of the first edition, that Mummy wouldn't write another book. But of course, LexisNexis was turning 100, and the Public Law Toolbox had been their second biggest seller. Now, it costs a lot of money, and it's over 1,000 pages long. And what they discovered was something very odd. They discovered that they were getting orders for this book from suburbia, from bookshops they had never heard from. And it wasn't just the stock standard professional orders, business orders, university orders, because this book is not a textbook. It's not prescribed in any law course. So they were keen for a second edition. I wasn't. And I said, "Hey, buddy, it was only two years ago," because that was at the start of this year, and nothing will have changed. I couldn't have been more wrong. So I go back to what I just said to you, that in this newly connected world, all life cycles have shortened and it will continue to compress. What I've discovered now, 3 years on from my last edition, is that so much has changed. Now, public law was a bad choice of topic for specialisation. I should have specialised in dinosaurs or something that didn't move or change. Yeah, well, I really seriously considered that. But what I have discovered, the one big takeout, now that I have finished, and now we're just in second edit, third edit, author queries, you all know about the writing of books. It takes ages to finish off. But nevertheless, you are my first audience to give my key readouts from my second edition. When I stand back and look at the 28 chapters, what do I see? So for the first time, this is the world premiere, I have discovered that the big takeout is information. I have had to create a new chapter called information, because what I've discovered is that those are the areas where there has been the greatest change. More availability, and that more availability is very interesting. More availability under the Official Information Act, certainly more calls for the Official Information Act to apply to more areas. The government's been very amenable as long as it doesn't apply to them so much. They're happy for it to apply to the courts. They weren't so happy about Parliament. I understand the arguments for and against with respect to constituency privacy, but I'm sure that you could do some carve-outs to protect constituents and still ensure that there's accountability in Parliament. But the interesting thing is this. This is a lecture that Baroness Onara O'Neill gave in 2008. And you would think that the call for greater information would result in greater trust of government, but it has not. And so I want to read this to you from her, because my job this morning is to change your thinking. And when I read this, it changed my thinking. As Baroness O'Neill said in the Wreath Lectures, on trust transparency despite, quote, high enthusiasms for ever more complete openness and transparency. Public trust seemingly has receded as transparency has advanced. Perhaps on reflection, we should not be wholly surprised. The very technologies that spread information so easily and efficiently are every bit as good at spreading misinformation and disinformation. Some sorts of openness and transparency may be bad for trust. Her solution, if we want to restore trust, we need to reduce deception and lies rather than secrecy. Some sorts of secrecy indeed support deception, others do not. Transparency and openness may not be the unconditional goods that they're fashionably supposed to be. By the same token, secrecy and lack of transparency may not be the enemies of trust. What does that mean for you? I think it's huge for you. I think of the 21st century, it isn't about access to information. It's about understanding what is quality information and what the information means. Now, the rest of us are plebs. We specialise in other things, but you specialise in information. So you are in the best possible position to use your considerable skills to be able to track back information. I don't live in the world of tweets. I have decided that you're either tweeting or you're doing other things. So I have decided not to tweet. I don't know how to tweet. I don't read tweets. My staff read tweets. If someone's defamed, I get told. If I'm defamed, I get told. And what I'm trying to say to you is it's the difference between being able to track back a tweet right back through to the press statement in the Beehive and then tweets that are designed to just disparage people or defame people. It's that ability, and you have it. Yeah, lots of people can learn. Of course they do. But you're professionals, and you're asking me about how to connect and thrive. Well, what I'm saying to you is if you want to add value to your profession, then the 21st century has delivered it to you on a plate. We need you more now than we've ever needed you, because the solution was never more information. The solution was true information, high quality information, not deception, not lies. Who can tell the difference now? People ring me and they say, oh, well, it must be true because it's out there in the media. Well, yes, that is a funny statement. So, of course, now we can't trust anything. And even the law cannot keep up with what is happening in the blogosphere, over the internet, on Facebook. It just can't keep up. We have a Wild West blogosphere. And yes, there have been proposals by the Law Commission that there be a new regulator for communications, but the Honourable Judith Collins, who was Minister at the time, decided that we would not do that. There is now a law that was proposed instead. That law is a bill, the Harmful Digital Communications Bill. Hopefully that will go through this term. But what I'm saying to you is that the law is struggling to keep up in this area. And so you will have to run ahead and help us. The privacy issues are huge. So in terms of the book, if you want to know the chapters that were totally rewritten, the information chapters, the privacy chapters, just the sheer amount of new issues there, particularly with information that people thought was private, but of course is now circulating all over the place. And of course, the number of court cases that there have been in the area. And I haven't got time this morning to go through all of those cases. In fact, Bill, how much longer do you want me to speak for?
You've got as long as you want.
Ah, okay. As long as I'm saying you are sexy and cool, yeah. But what I'm saying to you is that the trend remains. The trend that was picked up in the first chapter, first edition of my book remains, and that is that there is an inexorable trend to demand greater accountability and greater transparency from government. That's the demand. The public want that. But what they're actually trying to get to is truth. They don't want heaps of information all over the place that they need to read. They just want to understand what's really going on. And what I'm saying to you is that there's a difference between information and what is really going on. And you are more likely to be able to get to the bottom of that. So in the 21st century, You really are detectives, that's what you are. You are really private investigators of the information variety to try and understand what information means when it comes to you. So the other 10 hot topics or tips that I found from writing my book in terms of scanning the horizon as to what was new are as follows. First of all, the new powers of the Inspector General of Intelligence. I had to rewrite that chapter as well. Boy, it was funny going back to read the old chapter. And of course, the old Inspector General was saying that he thought that it was fine for there to be him part-time and his PA part-time, and the entire budget of the office was $138,000 per annum to safeguard the whole of the security and intelligence community in New Zealand, because he said that we had a process or a system whereby we could expect that the players would come and talk to him if they thought something had gone wrong. And it was just very interesting going back to read that in the light of what has happened in the last 3 years. Everything has completely changed, of course. And when you go back and look at the relevant provisions of the GCSB Act, which have been beefed up, and the concerns about private New Zealand citizens' communications being intercepted, and all of the other developments in this area, including the fact that we now have a beefed up Inspector General, and we also have a deputy. There was no deputy before, so if the Inspector General, who was part-time, went on holiday, we didn't have anybody looking after us. We're just in a very different situation. So this is obviously one area that's exploded since then: Ed Snowden, WikiLeaks, the whole 9 yards. The second big new thing, well, obviously the new Inquiries Act. And it was interesting the other day when we had the first inquiry announced by the Honourable Simon Bridges. That inquiry into the lights out in Auckland brought back all sorts of memories for me. I acted for Mercury Energy when the lights went out in 1998. I was much younger then, and we were operating in Wellington, and I remember saying to Jeffrey, you take half the firm and keep the firm running, I'll go to Auckland, and we will advise Mercury Energy and act for them on the lights out. So that was an N-4 event, and of course, deja vu, 2014, it happens again. There was a big fire at the substation, and reports are that they said, well, the damage was bad because it burned for quite a while because we didn't know there was a fire. So probably I wouldn't have let my client say that had I been acting for them. But it's interesting because we now have a whole new Inquiries Act. Now, what does that mean for you? Well, there's no such thing as ministerial inquiries anymore. Remember, we had the problems with David Henry into Kitteridge report, whether or not he had the powers to summon information or not summon information. Did the Honourable Peter Dunn leak the report? Didn't he leak the report? None of those issues are going to arise now, because basically all inquiries are of two sorts. There are the public inquiries, which include royal commissions, or there are government inquiries, like the one being undertaken at the moment into the allegations concerning the Honourable Judith Collins. They're all under the same Act, and so it's all fully regulated. And so there are full powers to be able to demand information and demand interviews. And you'll note there was a very interesting piece in the Weekend Herald, Fran O'Sullivan saying that she'd been summoned as a witness to give evidence before the Honourable Lester Chisholm. So all of that is very interesting for you, because if you look at the Inquiries Act, there's a very interesting part at the back. And what it says now is that all of the information that comes out of inquiries are subject to the Official Information Act. And there are even provisions in there to make sure that they're properly filed. All that information is properly filed under the Public Records Act. So information is king and queen in the 21st century, really important. And I'd be very, very interested now to take a look at all of that evidence which is coming out, because of course inquiries are not courts, and you cannot prosecute people as a consequence of what happens in inquiries. But of course they do tell you where X marks the spot. So if you are a prosecuting agency, you can then circle back and then you can get evidence on the record to be able to prosecute. It's a big deal, and we know that because of the Cave Creek, the Pike River Royal Commission, and also because of the Canterbury Earthquake Royal Commission. A lot of prosecutions there. Even with respect to the the infant formula scandal that we had with Fonterra. That was the first inquiry undertaken under the Inquiries Act. There have been prosecutions under the Animal Products Act. Number 3, there's a new legislation act. Did you know that? I'm sure you did. And as a consequence of that, we now have revision bills. These are bills that just update things, but also a new category of things. Regulations are now named disallowable instruments. It's really complicated, and I won't go into it with you, except for this. I discovered this the other day. It's really exciting. There are now disclosure of government bills. So in June of 2013, I bet you didn't know this, the government agreed to disclose key features of all legislation produced by government. The purpose of the disclosure requirements for new legislation is to ensure that its policies get translated into legislation that's robust, principled and effective. And the Treasury's released guidelines on these disclosure requirements. How many people knew about this? One. There you are. You're the only person that doesn't need to buy my book. I feel very superior about this because when you're a public lawyer and you find a tool like this, you know now. You get your librarian to go get it, and you can find out a whole range of things that you did not otherwise know. So that's the brilliant thing about forcing yourself to train, which is what I do through writing these books, as well as making a contribution. The fourth thing, constitutional review has now reported. I didn't even read this when it came out. It wasn't designed to do very much, so I thought probably I didn't have time, and I hadn't spent time looking at it. I have had time looking at it now, and it is still really relevant for you to just look at it because it is the best compilation of what New Zealanders think matter in terms of constitutional law. What would they know? Well, they know a bit. This is what they think matters, and so I'm really surprised, but not surprised in some ways, that they make it really clear that it's not acceptable for our Parliament, despite the fact that it's sovereign, just to push through any constitutional reform. At the moment, we could become a republic without going through a plebiscite, without an extraordinary majority in Parliament, or without any referendum, just not necessary. But of course, what the public's saying is that that's not acceptable. The fifth thing, the Financial Markets Authority. In terms of business regulation, boy, that is just a huge gorilla of a regulator, and it's doing so many things, and what it's doing is really, really interesting. That's well worth looking at, that whole field. The Commerce Commission remains important, but the Financial Markets Authority is really amazing in terms of all of its manifold manifestations. I used to sit on the Securities Commission. The FMA is more than double the size, and in terms of its reach and purport, huge. And I won't go into it. But the sixth thing is the Supreme Court. When I first read when I first wrote the first edition, there wasn't a whole lot. I thought they were a bit disparate. We were still getting 7 judgments, and you'd read 7 of them, and you'd still not know whether it was a yes or a no. I think the Supreme Court is very focused now on autochthonous jurisprudence, not just on treaty issues, although they were important. Year after year, Maori were going to the Privy Council and they'd say, oh, this is very interesting, but these are autochthonous issues. These are indigenous to New Zealand. We don't know a lot about them. We're going to revert them back to the court in New Zealand. So it's great to have a Supreme Court. It's great to have our own autochthonous jurisprudence being created. Seventhly, we had to completely rewrite elections. There's just been such a development in this area, and it's going to continue to be an area of interest. A lot of you won't know that much about elections, but it's been 1 year in every 3 we have elections, and there's a whole lot of information that needs to be known about the way in which they operate. There's been a lot of court cases. That's why I'm so tired. I've been litigating a lot lately. We've been litigating against the Electoral Commission, against political parties. So it's a whole specialist field in itself, and it's evolving and it's growing because political parties are very important, but also it's a heavily regulated area and it's a high public policy area. In other words, have we got it right? Now, it's very interesting to watch the Sunday Herald start a campaign, or was it the Sunday Star Times? Can't remember. Start a campaign which was designed to say that any donations, any political donations should now be made transparent. So once again, it's part of that trend, that inexorable push for more and more and more transparency, more and more information. The 8th point, all complaints bodies, whether it's the Ombudsman, the Privacy Commissioner, the Health and Disability Commissioner, you name it, they are all experiencing more complaints and more complex complaints. And 9thly, similarly, the Serious Fraud Office, more fraud, more complex fraud, and we're seeing, I think, just seeing more reporting. Maybe nothing's changed, but maybe there's more reporting of fraud in the public service. And you'll note that on Friday, the Independent Conduct, Police Conduct Commissioner reported about officers that had lied on oath, and how shocking that is. It's good that it was shocking. I hope it remains shocking in this country. I hope it does not become pro forma. One of the reasons I live here, and one of the key things that drives me in the law are 3 things. I believe in the rule of law. I believe that justice not only needs to be done, but it must be seen to be done. And we have become really lawyers of last resort, and I seem to derive a lot of cases which are David and Goliath. The final thing really is just that there is greater government regulation everywhere. In the professions, there is more, and it is heavier. So whether that be real estate agents or lawyers, whether that be auditors or financial advisors, really no area now not regulated. And with respect to sectors, very difficult to find sectors now not regulated. Look at adventure tourism. A couple of people died, Prime Minister got lobbied, we've now got regulation there. If you look at the front page of the Weekend Dom Post, I'm an avid reader of media because you have to keep in touch in this area. You'll see that there was a big story about the beauty industry. Don't go get lasers. They don't know what they're doing and they're not regulated. Actually, that's not true. You can actually make a complaint to the Health and Disability Commissioner. But once again, a big call for further regulation in that area. So look, I could keep talking, but the key thing to say to you is this. I wrote the 2nd edition of Public Law Toolbox for the same reason really that I wrote the 1st edition. At the end of the day, we all need to have a purpose for living. We all need to try and exercise our powers and our talents, because that is what brings true happiness. For me, I was an outsider. I came to this country when I was relatively young. I could not speak the language and I did not understand government. In fact, I came from a culture where I was told by my parents that government was corrupt and I should have nothing to do with government. As you can see, I was not good at taking their advice. And so I learnt many things about government, and it is what I have specialised in now for the last 30 years of my life. I'm about to complete 28 years as a lawyer. So I decided that I would try and leave a legacy, and the legacy was that for all of those on the outside, I would show them what it was like on the inside. And so I completed the book, but I also completed it to challenge myself. You know, sometimes you need to pick up a stone and you need to throw it at the tiger. And that's fine, as long as you know how to run. Because if you do not, then the tiger will overtake you. When I picked up the stone and threw it at the tiger was very big. And the reason was because I was running a law firm full-time, and I tried to make the law firm smaller and I tried to downsize it, because every time I write one of these books, it's $1 million fees waiver. That's the fees that I don't earn because I'm busy writing and I'm busy trying to get other people in my firm to help me run around and get all the stuff that I need and check things. But the good thing about throwing a rock at the tiger is that if you can outrun the tiger, then you will be the better for it. And at this point, as I stand here now, putting every single chapter into final form, I know more about my field than I have ever known. And my challenge to you is this: to see yourself with new eyes. Proust said that the true journey of discovery is not new lands, it is new eyes. And I am here this morning because I respect what you do. I understand what you do and the value of what you do. And I want to say that in the 21st century, the future is coming to meet you. Thank you.